instrumental to the victory at Yorktown was this type of artillery, the mortar. My colleague TJ will help me show you all the finer points of loading and firing one of these things, and we'll illustrate how they played a part in the victory here at Yorktown. Mortars are a kind of short cannon of a large bore with chambers. Their use is to throw hollow balls filled with powder called shells, which, falling upon any building or into the works of a fortification, burst, and their fragments destroy everything within reach. Bombs from mortars could be fired at high angles in order to send them over the enemy defenses. Once inside of a city, they would cause fear and disorder and damage in places the enemy might have thought were safe. Targets could include enemy tents, powder storehouses, officers' quarters. Could be a lot of different things within the enemy fortifications that we're trying to hit, but any of it could achieve our basic goal, which was to ruin the enemy's men and material, which would also break their spirits in the process. In other cases, the bombs could be fired directly into the earthworks, where they would blow up and do some damage to these fortifications. This would have helped done to assist the heavy siege guns in breaking through the enemy defenses by gouging holes in their earthworks where the infantry could then assault the enemy. In order to assist in this process, some mortars were actually mounted onto carriages and were called hobbits. General Knox, the commander of the American artillery at the siege, ordered several mortars to be converted into hobbits for the siege in order to throw bombs into the enemy earthworks. Here at our museum, we have a recreated version of a 4.5-inch Coehorn mortar that fires a roughly 9-pound bomb. Ours is relatively small, though, in comparison to some of the artillery that was here at the Battle of Yorktown. Some of the mortars here were 10 or 12 inches in diameter and fired a 100 to 200-pound bomb. However, these pieces, the smaller ones, give us a lot more opportunity to demonstrate how they're used and give the public an idea of the effective use of a mortar. Today, my colleague TJ will help me go over the steps to load and fire this weapon, and we're going to talk a little bit about the instruments and processes involved in using one of these things successfully. And so the first thing we're going to need to do in order to load this mortar is to get some powder. We have here a budge barrel, which is going to help shield the powder from moisture, from anything getting into the powder, and allow us easy access to it so we can scoop our quantity of powder that we're going to need to actually load the bomb. Alright, so now that the powder's been loaded, we need to add the wad. So this is going to help to secure the powder at the back of the chamber. And now it's that time to load the bomb?
Yep.
Alright, so where do we put the bomb? Alright, so TJ, go ahead and walk them through how you load the bomb in.
Alright, typically you will elevate the mortar straight up so the bomb can be gently lowered in there. Okay, now that the wad is over top of the powder, we got to insert the bomb. Typically you would elevate the mortar, so Andrew, if you go ahead and hold that upright. The bomb would be gingerly placed in there. You'll work it around till the fuse is facing the center. Then you take several wedges and pop those in there to center this in the bore. These will be placed on all four sides to really wedge that in there tightly. What that allows is the bomb stays in the center. The flame from the propellant charge will wrap around the bomb and ignite the fuse.
The fuse on one of these things is going to be a hollowed out wooden peg like this one, filled with a combustible material. In this case, what do we have in here?
It would be a composition of meal powder, potassium nitrate, the main ingredient, and then some sulfur to even out the burn.
And so they're going to have cut measures to determine how far, or how long rather, the bomb will go before detonating. And then the inside of the bomb itself is going to be hollow and charged with gunpowder. So when this fuse detonates inside, that's what's going to get us the explosion from the shell. So another thing that's important to remember about a mortar like this is that you do want to be able to aim the weapon. You want to be able to direct at your target. And so in this case, you're going to need to know a little bit about trigonometry and understanding the angles and dimensions that are going to allow us to get the bomb where we need it to go. Now, John Muller, who was a British artillerist who wrote a treatise on artillery in 1768, gave us some very basic rules from which to operate when it comes to aiming an artillery piece like this one, like the mortar. So, assuming the rule that a range of a body projected with an angle of 45 degrees is equal to the square of the time of its flight, expressed in seconds multiplied by 16.1 feet, let a body projected with an angle of 45 degrees of an elevation to be 12 seconds in its flight. What is the horizontal range? It's a fancy way of just basically asking, if we're at 45 degrees, which we're roughly at right now, and we set the fuse to about 12 seconds, how far, or rather 12 seconds is how long it takes to get to the other side, how far are we sending that bomb? And so the square root of 12 is 144, which when multiplied by 16.1 gives 2,318.4 feet, or 772.8 yards. So in this case, that is about how far we're going to be able to send this bomb if we were to load this and send that bomb to go about 12 seconds into the air. So we've gotten our quadrant here to give us a determination as the angle, and presumably we've already fired these things enough to know how long that bomb is going to stay in the air, considering the propellant charge that we're using in this thing, and so we can make a determination for how far the bomb is going to travel. So yeah, a little bit of math there. Fire! Fire! In surviving accounts of the siege of Yorktown, the defenders often wrote about the devastation caused by the bombs that fell on their positions. Some bombs killed men by landing on them directly. In other cases, the bursting or shell fragments killed or maimed them outright. Even some men who lived might suffer wounds severe enough for a surgeon to require an immediate amputation. The shrapnel and shells from these bombs again fell short and fell into the houses and buildings of the city, and into our camp, where they did much damage and robbed many good soldiers of their lives, or broke their arms and legs. I myself had a piece of shell from an exploded bomb in my hand, which weighed more than 30 pounds and was more than 3 inches thick. As you can see, these things don't mess around. The following casualty reports were provided by Lieutenant Pretchel of the von Voigt Regiment in his diary. I'm going to cover ones between October 13th and 17th that deal with bombs specifically. But be aware that I've omitted details about musket injuries, cannon injuries, disease casualties, and I've also edited out the extremely graphic accounts as well. So things inside of Yorktown were even worse than what I'm about to make them how I'm about to make them sound. So just keep that in mind. Also, I'm going to do my best with the German accents and the name, since some of them sound quite weird in English. So we're going to do our best here to get the names right. But if we don't, apologies. October 13th. Wounded in the tents in the trenches from the von Voigt Regiment were Privates Körner and Appold of the Colonel's company by a bomb which landed in the tent. The first had his foot shot off, and later received a wound in his knee. Private Wagner of the Lieutenant Colonel's company was instantly killed when a 200-pound bomb landed in the tent of Corporal Gestatter. 4 others in the tent were not wounded. Wounded of the von Seboten Regiment was Grenadier Neutzel, whose foot was shot off by a bomb. Both servants of Captain von Ebe and Captain von Mecht were wounded by a spent bomb, which they were trying to dig up. Corporal Buser of the Lieutenant Colonel's company of the von Voigt Regiment was killed by an exploding bomb while on work detail. A regimental cannon of the von Voigt Regiment was completely destroyed by an enemy bomb. On October 15th, this afternoon, a bomb landed in the regimental bake ovens of the von Voigt Regiment, wounding Corporal Schilling and Private Auernheimer of the Captain von Stein's company. So with all that in mind, the condition and morale within the city rapidly deteriorated. As damaging as mortar bombs could be, a significant factor in their effectiveness was also the psychological effect. The incessant shelling and fear, combined with other types of artillery and the threat of bloody hand-to-hand fighting, deeply troubled the soldiers, and was likely a major factor for many of those who deserted when they could. The British weren't the only ones that had to concern themselves, though, with the incoming shells that might be leveled on their position. The Americans outside the fortifications had to receive incoming shells from the British, and so as a result, the Americans were also on their guard against potential bombs landing on their fortifications. And one of the ways they maintained their guard was that Washington required many of the soldiers to yell "shell" whenever a bomb was incoming. Now, a figure that most people are probably familiar with, Alexander Hamilton, was having a discussion with his former superior, General Knox, who was the commander of the American artillery here at Yorktown. And the discussion centered around whether or not yelling out "shell" as a bomb was incoming was soldierly enough, was not appropriate for a soldier to be doing. Now, as this conversation was ongoing, 2 bombs promptly fell into their fortification, at which point the soldiers yelled "shell," and Knox and Hamilton scrambled for cover. As they're scrambling for cover, Hamilton hides behind the largest thing he can find, which is Knox. Knox is a big guy. So as Hamilton's hiding behind Knox, Knox is a little bit offended by this, and they promptly get into a scuffle. Knox then grabs him and throws Hamilton out towards the exploding bombs, and Hamilton, at that point, scrambles himself to get to another piece of cover. The person recounting the incident does mention that the bombs went off a few minutes later. So it's definitely dangerous, but it was, of course, since no one was actually injured in this incident, it was quite humorous. Knox was then quoted as having said something to the effect of, "Now, Mr. Hamilton, what do you think of saying shell?" And then he also promptly followed up with, "Don't you ever use me as a breastwork again." Now, when it comes to the siege itself, there's one other quote I'd like to read to you all, and this comes from the very end of the siege. As the siege was wrapping up, one of the German auxiliaries fighting for the British, who was present at the battle, he went ahead and gave his account kind of at the end of the siege. And he says, "We were heartily glad the siege was over, for we all thought that there would be another attack. If General Cornwallis had delayed the surrender, the French grenadiers were to lead it. During the siege, the enemy had fired more than 8,000 great bombs of from 100 to 200 pounds." So clearly, the psychological effect that the bombs had, as well as the threat of hand-to-hand combat, the siege artillery punching holes in their fortifications, all had a cumulative effect on the psyche of the soldiers that were besieged here at Yorktown, and certainly led, at least in part, to the success of the American and French effort here at the Siege of Yorktown. Well, thanks for watching to the end. I hope you all enjoyed watching this as much as we enjoyed shooting it. Obviously, the audio we captured for this video doesn't really do the mortar justice, so if you have a chance to see one of our musket demonstrations or cannon demonstrations, I highly recommend you do so. Also, we're always looking for y'all's comments, and particularly we want to know if you've had a chance to see our artillery demonstration, we want to know what you thought of it, and if you've had a chance to see one at another museum, let us know in the comments where you saw those demonstrations, because whenever I take a vacation, I want to know where the cannon demonstrations are. So hit us up, and thanks for watching. Y'all have a nice day. And of course you would.
Run away!